And good morning, Ottawa. I just wanted to cut that a little short because we want as much time as possible for this morning. Welcome to CKCU 93.1 FM. My name again is Brendan McLaughlin, and joining me once again in the studio is the Honorable Ambassador Yeganian. Mr. Yeganian, yesterday was the 101st anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, a subject that we've covered here a couple weeks ago before and again last year. Thank you very much for joining me. Last year, your time was a little short, but I'm very appreciative that you were able to make it. I've met you once before, a couple years ago, and we had a really great chat. It was really interesting, especially you and myself growing up on completely different parts of the world, you in the Soviet states and myself in North America. And it's really great to have your son in here and the consul as well. Your son also was serving in the Armenian Armed Forces for a time a couple years ago, just after I met him. And this is all before I knew about Artsakh and the Nagorno-Karabakh, and I didn't realize just how much your family history is really deeply involved. The roots are there. Is there anything you wanted to say maybe to your son and your armed forces back home, if anyone is listening?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, of course, for this invitation. Yes, it's a duty, and Georg has done his duty in Armenia, and now Nico is serving in army.
Yes, your 19-year-old son is now there.
Yes, yes. So I just want to all Armenian soldiers, and not only Armenia, all soldiers to be safe in peace.
And your sons also gave up their diplomatic exemption to conscription. That's really an amazing thing that they've done. I would be very proud if I were you, and I'm sure you are, absolutely.
Well, I'm proud of my sons, of course, but it's a duty of every citizen of Armenia.
Definitely. This weekend is also the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising of Ireland, and my own family especially is affected by that because our family gets split up by borders that never existed before. And it's very interesting how history changes a century later. Serge and I have always discussed this, how similar our people are.
It is indeed so, and it's interesting. But I remember the George Clooney saying that yesterday that his family they were refugees from Ireland actually, and George Clooney was in Armenia for the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. That yesterday
I saw it on the news yesterday.
Yes,
I took a photo of it.
They bestowed to a wonderful lady, Margaret Barankiste from Burundi, who saved 30,000 children in Africa.
That's just amazing. And we've actually covered a couple of topics this month on genocide, including the Rwandan genocide. There are millions of Canadians living now who are genocide refugees and ethnic cleansing refugees. I think that Canada really is a great country to come to, especially when you're fleeing violence and just terrible oppression, especially right now with Syria. My sister actually... it was very funny. She met a Syrian refugee family in the grocery store, and they were trying to figure out how sunscreen works, how suntan lotion works, and they didn't understand. So they asked like the palest white girl they could find, my sister, who's of Irish descent. How does this work? I don't understand. What do I do? And she helped them out a little bit. But I also understand that the Armenian community is really helpful when it comes to taking in Syrian refugees, sponsoring people, bringing them over to the country, just to get them as quickly as possible a fresh start over here.
You're right. Canada indeed is a great country and very peace-loving. And how many refugees have come to this country over the couple of decades already? Right now we're talking about Syrian refugees, but before you accepted basically everyone.
And now tens of thousands more coming in too.
Yes. And of course, Armenian community in Canada, first of all, it is very well organized. Secondly,
extremely well organized.
Yes,
I've seen the protests.
Yes, and they started to privately sponsor refugees from Syria a couple of years ago, even before all the state-run programs started. And at this moment, we count about 3,750 refugees from Syria of Armenians and that already came to Canada. And I cannot say how grateful they are, and I am also, of course, as my compatriots. We want them to be safe, of course. And it is terrible what's happening in the Middle East with ISIL, and it's undescribable
Some
terror.
of the refugees coming from... I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, Ambassador.
Right.
Some of the refugees coming over are actually Christian Armenians who are once again being displaced, and it's intergenerational and extra-generational displacement. You have Armenians being displaced to Lebanon and then being displaced from there to other countries and
Exactly.
all over the world, and it's happening again.
Exactly. That's why we have to be proactive, and that's why when we talk about Armenian genocide that happened 101 years ago, we're talking also about the prevention, because this is very important. If we address this properly, if we punish the perpetrators at time, which unfortunately we didn't have a tribunal, if we recognize internationally this threat that it poses to the world security and simple, regular citizens of the world for their survival, for their regular life in their towns, in their villages, that is the time that you address it appropriately, and that is the time that you understand that you have to do everything what's possible to prevent future atrocities, wherever it is, be it in Syria, be it in Western Armenia, or anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of genocide, now this is an issue of that creates a lot of tension, especially even here in Ottawa, with the history from 30, 40 years ago. There is some denial that a genocide took place. Many argue that it was the first genocide of the 20th century, before the word genocide was even invented.
Yes.
And yet there is still some denial that it ever happened. And
Yes.
we've heard of genocide denial from many different conflicts in the world, but this is one that's been going on for a long time. And when it started, over 100 years ago, which led to more, there was 2 million Armenians living in what was Western Armenia, which is now Eastern Turkey. 1.5 million of those people were displaced, starved, kicked out of their homes, and forced to walk for weeks on end to the point of death.
Exactly.
And there is denial that it happened. The Turkish people have even said that they killed some of their own people, as though admitting killing your own people makes that any better. I don't think so. I think that, it's not about what I think, actually. But what preceded the mass killings of Armenians that began 100 years ago? The Ottoman Turks, having recently entered World War I on the side of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, were worried that Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire would offer wartime assistance to Russia. Russia had long coveted control of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, which controlled access to the Black Sea, and therefore Russia's only year-round seaports. Which is not true, because Russia has ports all over the country. Do you think that this kind of insecurity that governments make up to justify killing people is wrong?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that the atrocities, the pogroms and massacres started not in 1915, they started in 1894 under Sultan Abdul Hamid II, or the Bloody, how they call him. So that was basically the culminating point on April 24, 1915. But the real reason is that we have to understand that at that time Ottoman Empire was inhabited with 20 million people. 8 million out of them were Turks, 6 million Arabs, more than 2 million Armenians, and others. So the most biggest segment, Christian segment, that was threat for central authorities, as they understood it, were Armenians.
The Muslim-dominant...
Yes, were Armenians. So they didn't have a problem at that time with Arabs and Kurds, but they had a huge problem with Armenians. And of course they cast the blame on Armenians that we sided with Russians. Well, for 1,000 years, these people were discriminated against on their own territory that was conquered by Turks who came in the 11th century from Altai Mountains, the nomadic tribes. And then they didn't have a right to fight for themselves. Of course they had the right to fight for themselves. They had the right to have an autonomy. And that process, which is called Armenian issue, started in 1861 with Berlin Congress. So basically they had to provide for a minimal security for Armenian population, which they never did. And under the cover of First World War, they basically disarmed Armenian soldiers.
They took away their guns, yes.
Who served in their army, who were citizens of Ottoman Empire. That was very cowardly. And then they killed them, and then they killed their families. Now, it was not only genocide. It is also called patricide, because they got rid the right of Armenians to live on their own land. So they basically didn't conquer them, but they also stole the Armenian land, the homeland that they lived there for 4,000 years. Now, the other problem, probably also legal but also psychological, is that there was no decision on Armenian genocide. There was a decision, let's say, on Holocaust in Nuremberg Tribunal. There was a reconciliation between Tutsis and Hutus in Rwanda. There is a tribunal on Yugoslavia and others, but we never had a tribunal or some sort of international agreement, legal action against the perpetrators of Armenian genocide. That is the problem.
Especially because so many years later, all of those people are now dead.
Yes. And the genocide term was not coined yet, and so on. Mm-hmm. But at this moment, we are in 21st century. There should be recognition. And again, coming back to Canada with your TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you, in your own country, you make attempt to right the wrong.
Yes, I agree.
Boarding schools.
How
cannot we appreciate it? How can we applaud to this? This is incredible. So this is what we need from Turkish government to apologize.
Now the Turks though. Sorry to interrupt again, Your Honor. Ambassador. I keep screwing that up. This is my first time in interviewing someone of this status. The Turks are afraid that if a genocide is recognized, large reparations have to be made. They believe this. Do you think that recognition could be achieved and yet an extraordinary sum of reparations doesn't need to be made because it's just been so long? The country has moved on in its own way. There are millions of diaspora in North America all over the place. Most Armenians living in America and Canada are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of genocide survivors. Do you think that now that people, have manifested their own destiny in other ways, are reparations really necessary?
You know what? First of all, they have to acknowledge the fact.
Of course.
They're fighting the fact itself, which is ridiculous. It has been documented throughout all the libraries and archives. The most respectful association of genocide scholars, everybody recognized the fact. You have to recognize the fact. You have to apologize. You have to try to reconcile. Regarding the land and reparations, no Armenian official or authority initiated trying to reconcile with Turkey without preconditions. We Armenians, we do not have any conditions in order to establish normal, good neighborly relations with Turkey. And that is what we did back in 2008. We started in 2009, we started the Zurich Protocols, which was few days after that violated by Erdogan, president. They just backtracked and they started again to put preconditions. How can you trust after this process, when you sign two protocols witnessed by France, Russia, United States, Switzerland, European Union foreign ministers? I mean, this is the highest level of a document, international document signed on such a high diplomatic level, and you just backtracked? How after that can you trust in your international partner, in your neighbor? So unfortunately, that trust was lost. And at this moment, we don't have any relations with Turkey. But we do have hope because they are bright individuals and even organizations within Turkey that start to acknowledge and start to try to fix the wrongs that were done 100 years ago.
Now, it is now considered general knowledge that the Erdogan administration and his family, including his first family, are involved in criminal wrongdoings and corruption, and including some family members of his are even accused of supporting people like the Islamic State. Do you think that if they were, a generation later gone, like they were voted out, or they disappeared, or they were forgotten about, do you think that maybe without that first family being involved, that maybe relations could improve? Because it seems to me that it's the administration's policy that they want to continue to deny and discriminate, and they're not willing to acknowledge that a genocide took place, because they think that it would involve some kind of acknowledgement of their wrongdoing, even though it was several generations ago. This is something that I never knew about until a number of years ago myself. If I was suddenly being accused of your ancestors did this or your ancestors did that, I would be like, I'm so sorry. I would vehemently apologize. But it seems as though that just apologizing for some wrongdoing that an ancestor of yours did many years ago is suddenly like, no, I can't do that. It would tarnish the honor and memory of that person. But if a family member of mine killed somebody, I would probably want to make reparations to the victims of that family if it affected them in a tangible way that I could help.
Yeah, I call it fake sense of honor. We can do that. We can have that black stain on our history. Everybody will have, black stain on our history, most of the nations. And you're right. But I think that it goes deeper than just the family of Erdogan, because for 100 years, people of Turkey, citizens of Turkey, were not educated about this. So they're normal, regular Turks walking on the streets that simply didn't have a clue, or still don't have a clue, what happened 100 years ago. So it goes much deeper. The education. People should be educated about this. People must know about this. Now with internet and with social media and with globalization, of course the information penetrates, even in countries with such limitations of democratic norms like Turkey.
But when information comes out of the country, such as President Obama has acknowledged other Turkish scholars who have come forward and acknowledged that a genocide took place, and more Turkish people are coming forward and speaking out against their own president. And they're being locked up for it. There was a German citizen a few weeks ago who was deported because of some comments that he made in his own newspaper, where he has rights to freedom of speech.
Yes.
And yet it was violated by Angela Merkel. She deported him for, satirically making fun of Erdogan. And it's ridiculous that she would actually play along with that. But it's unfortunate, because I think that they're trying to just keep Turkey within the EU. But why is it that people's free speech would have to be violated just to protect a lie?
Well, I guess this is a cultural difference between Western world, I would say, with the best democratic freedoms that we have currently, and some countries, which have limitations on the freedom. And obviously, Turkey, certain categories within Turkish society are striving and doing their best to be free and open. The newspapers, the journalists, investigative journalists. But unfortunately, the culture that is coming from above, from administration, with so many articles, the article that prohibits the insulting of Turkishness and other ridiculous approaches. Of course, it doesn't have the democratic processes in Turkey.
And now even Angela Merkel has backtracked and apologized for doing this. But wouldn't it be too late for this man? Like, if he's already been deported, he's basically done. He's basically got his goose cooked.
Well, unfortunately, sometimes politics can, pitch in and play a role. But I think that there are more important things. For instance, like for Canada, with your neighbor, or other countries like Australia that do not recognize fully the Armenian genocide. They make some statements, or like Obama, he does all the statement with using the word "metzger" but never using G word. But I think that it is incredible when you see countries like Canada that took leadership actually. And I'm telling my friends very often that maybe Canada is not a superpower like United States, but you are a superpower on human rights issues. You're a champion of human rights issues. And that's why Armenian genocide was recognized in this country on all the levels possible.
And especially when you think of Canada, you don't really think of a violent country that uses arms and bullets to express itself. It will go on the official record. It will elect a prime minister that is more open to these kinds of things through democracy.
Yes, of course. And there is another great example, your CMHR, Canadian Museum of Human Rights, that opened in Winnipeg, Manitoba,
yes.
which has all 5 genocides recognized by Canada, but also other violations, big violations of human rights, like slavery and all other violations.
Including Canada's own history.
Including Canada's own history. That's a great example for Turkey at the same time. Take a look at Canada.
Ambassador, it's been a real honor, actually, a great pleasure. But I wanted to just quickly ask you, before you left, or as long as you want to stay, we will stay. Walk me through what your day was like yesterday. There was a lot of events going on. You spoke on Parliament Hill in front of a crowd of tens of thousands of people.
Yes.
How many people went? I don't actually know.
About 3,500.
3,500. Oh, okay. Serge was telling me, like, look out, traffic's going to be bad. There's going to be 10,000 Armenians taking all the parking spots.
Well, I'm sorry, some interruptions of traffic occurred here in this town. The day is very emotional, always, everywhere in the world. In Armenia, starting from Armenia, when million and a half people, even more, go to memorial in Tsitsernakaberd, but also throughout the world. And yesterday, our day started with the arrival of thousands of Armenians from Montreal and Toronto and Laval and Vancouver and other cities to the embassy, where we had a solemn ceremony. We started at the embassy, and we put some flowers to the monument, which is called Immortal Armenia. Yeah. After that, with our clergy.
And that's an image of
that's
the Mother Mary with a couple children. Is that what that is?
A symbolic image that has so many meanings in it, and there are also Armenian churches on the site if you look at it. But the message is that Armenian people live on, and immortal Armenia, that includes the history of our pre-Christian history, Christian history, genocide, everything. So it's a symbolic monument. After that, we went to Parliament Hill, where we had, of course, our political rally, let's say, with the presence of political leadership of Canada, with Mr. Faisal Al-Khoury reading the statement of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, with representatives of all the parties, Conservatives, NDP, everyone, but also of diplomatic corps. And after that, of course, we went back to the embassy, the staff and my family, but 3,000-4,000 Armenians, they marched, as I saw, towards the Turkish embassy, where they held the regular meeting in protest of Turkish embassy, but basically asking Turkish
I saw a little bit of the end of that. I drove by it.
Yes, basically asking Turkish government to acknowledge the reality of Armenian genocide. It was a very emotional day, but also a very important day, because we send a message to people of the world. This is not Armenian tragedy only. This is a global tragedy. And we have a role to play. If we're serious about our roles as citizens, as countries, as society, we have a role to play. That's it.
Ambassador, if this isn't too personal, how is your family, because you guys come from Armenia. There are two kinds of Armenians. There are the diaspora, which are spread out across the world, and cultural Armenians who grew up in Armenia. How is your family personally affected by this? I'm just curious if it's not too much to ask.
No, of course.
Do you have any stories?
Of course. Basically, I think that every family, even in Eastern Armenia, was affected by the genocide. And we have an incredible story that my son Nico actually put on Facebook yesterday. But on my wife's side, when they were running during the genocide, her grandfather and mother. Grandfather was killed, of course, and grandmother took their kids and they ran away. Now, she had 2 kids, and one of them, elder son, got sick on the way. And she understood at some moment that she wouldn't make it to Armenia unless she leave her sick son behind, and she takes a healthy one. So she had to bury him with her own hands. That boy's name was Nico, and that's why his grandson, my father-in-law, was named Nico, and that's why my son was named Nico. So there are stories like that, many of them. And my wife Maria was named Maria after that great mother. So those
that was on your wife's
stories.
side of the family.
That is on my wife's side, yes, yes. But
where does Gevork come from? I'm just curious. Joining us in the studio, we also have Armin's son, Gevork. He also served in the Armenian Armed Forces, and he came in here. I don't know if Gevork wants to comment, but your mic is on right now. But if you wanted to tell us the story about where you got your name, if you know.
Hi, thank you very much for having me here as well. I got my name from my dad's dad, so my grandfather. My dad is a very big advocate on having Armenian names run through the family. So my grandfather's name is actually Georgi, which is in Russian.
Like Georgie.
Yeah. Like George or any different kinds of that name. And since, like I said, since my dad is a really strong advocate of Armenian names, he changed...
my family's like that too.
Yeah.
We like the Irish names, yeah.
He changed Georgi to Gevork, and I was named after my grandfather on my dad's side.
Thank you very much for contributing, Gev. If there's anything you want to say, by the way, chime in if you'd like. No. What was your experience like watching your father, basically represent your people from Armenia to Canada? You know, like he basically is responsible for all these Armenians that are out there in Canada.
Yeah, and I know this is going to sound obvious since I'm his son and all of that, but I'm always very proud. I think that my father is doing a great job in Canada representing our people. And like it was already mentioned before, it is great to see that countries like Canada are on full support towards the Armenian people regarding whether the genocide or any other issues for that matter as well. But it's always an honor and a pride to watch him firsthand and be there by his side at all times.
Thank you very much for joining in.
Oh, thank you.
Ambassador. I'm still not getting used to this. It's been a great day today so far. But we're actually going to go to a quick commercial break, and we will be right back.
Live Rush, the National Arts Center's last-minute, low-cost ticket program for students only. Live Rush offers students the chance to witness the best in music, dance, and theater for only $12. No membership is required. Simply bring your student ID to the NAC box office after 10 a.m. the day before the show until 6 p.m. on the day of the performance. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for news, updates, and reminders. Visit nac-cna.ca for upcoming events and more information about the Live Rush program. CKCU is a proud sponsor of the NAC's Live Rush program. You're tuned to CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa.
And we're back. I just wanted to say to Ambassador Yeganian, thank you so much for coming. It was such a tremendous honor that we were able to get all this together. Gevork, thank you for commenting. Serge, thank you for running the cameras. And Ambassador, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you spending your time. Of course, to do this probably on the weekend would have been impossible, but I'm glad that the schedule worked out the way it did. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope that maybe we can do this again next year if I'm still here. I probably will be, but I don't know.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you for the invitation to come to the studio, and I want to say that it's a blessing to represent Armenia in Canada. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I would agree. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
We're just going to go ahead and take another quick break because we need to, disassemble, and we will be right back.
This is CKCU 93.1 FM in the nation's capital. Live Rush, the National Arts Center's last-minute, low-cost ticket program for students only. Live Rush offers students the chance to witness the best in music, dance, and theater for only $12. No membership is required. Simply bring your student ID to the NAC box office after 10 a.m. the day before the show until 6 p.m. on the day of the performance. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for news, updates, and reminders. Visit nac-cna.ca for upcoming events and more information about the Live Rush program. CKCU is a proud sponsor of the NAC's Live Rush program.
Carleton University's radio station, CKCU 93.1 FM.